Welcome to Buildings and Beyond,
the podcast that explores how we can create a more sustainable built environment
by focusing on efficiency, accessibility, and health.
I'm Robb Aldrich.
And I'm Kelly Westby.
This episode, I'm talking with Lois Arena, who is an engineer and the director of Passive House Services at Stephen Winter Associates. And she's in charge of, well, all things Passive House at this company, as you might tell from her title. But she's really been involved in some of the biggest Passive House projects in the United States to date. And this conversation is really a big picture. It's a little different. I asked her, we should do a Passive House episode. And she said, you know what? I have a list of FAQs that I answer 4,000 times a week. Let's talk about those. So it's very easy on my part. I just asked her FAQs. But here's a primer on Passive House with Lois. Thanks, Lois.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for being here.
Happy to do it.
So this is a little different. Lois is really the Passive House maven here at Stephen Winter Associates. She might use stronger terms.
I'm the boss.
In charge of Passive House, I believe I've heard quite recently.
Yes.
Period. But this session, or this podcast is going to be a little different. When we sat down, it's like, what would make a good Passive House podcast? And you said, here's the top 10 FAQs that I get about Passive House 400 times a month. And you actually have a little brochure that you had printed up, which I didn't know about. So I was happy to read that and see that. So here we go. This is the top several I picked and choose.
Okay.
And maybe I added one or two of my
mixed it
own.
up.
Yeah, you know. So first,
Okay.
what is Passive House?
Passive House is a building energy standard, and it currently is the most stringent standard in the world. And it's a performance-based standard that gives you what I call an energy budget. So there's an energy demand per square foot that you're not allowed to exceed. And there's one for heating, one for cooling, and then one for the whole building, all energy uses in the building.
So is it energy consumption? Are there peak demand requirements also? This is like an energy consumption over the course of a year.
It's an annual energy demand.
Okay.
Yes, for all
Cool.
three categories.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that's at its core, that's what it is.
At its core.
All right.
Yes.
So key requirements other than the energy demand?
There are some key requirements. So they're not just concerned with energy efficiency. They want to make sure the buildings are durable.
Okay.
All right. So no moisture problems, no mold, no indoor air quality problems. And they also want to make sure that they're comfortable. So they don't want you to squeeze down the energy efficiency by, say, a massive PV array to have a really poor envelope. So they focus on the envelope of the building first. They focus on comfort, durability, and then energy efficiency.
Okay. Interesting. So envelope is the first target.
Envelope is first target.
Okay.
Yeah.
And air tightness is a big piece of that, I think.
It's a very big piece of
Okay.
that. Yeah. The Passive House air tightness requirement, depending on what code or standard you're comparing it to, is generally 5 to 10 times tighter than any other standard out there or code requirement.
Yeah, I remember 20 years ago, before I was here, I was doing solar thermal system, hydronic heating systems, and somebody told me they did a blower door test on their house and came back with 1 ACH 50. And I told him he was full of crap. There's no way. There's no way a house can be that
I probably
tight.
would have said that 10 years ago, too.
This was like 20. I was like, yeah, obviously we can't trust this guy at all. He's smoking something. But that's like, until recently, I think it was like 0.6 ACH 50, air changes per hour at 50 pascals. Is that?
That's still the requirement.
That's still a thing. Okay. I thought they were shifting to a area or a per square foot of enclosure.
They are. So,
okay.
Well, there's two different standards. One's the U.S. standard and one's the international standard. The U.S. split off from the international standard. When they did that, they went to solely a CFM per square foot of facade. And that's for large
US.
buildings, the U.S.
Okay.
That's 0.08 CFM per square foot of facade. So very, very tight.
Gotcha.
The international version, they were used to doing smaller buildings. 0.6 was their standard. As the buildings got bigger, they came up with a recommendation for buildings over, I think it's probably 10,000 square feet, actually. So not even that huge. That you they recommend that you go to 0.033 CFM per square foot of facade. And so for a building like Cornell, that's almost, I think, 200,000 square feet.
So this is a dormitory for Cornell Medical School?
This
Is that
was
right?
the Cornell Tech campus's student housing.
Okay.
So it's not
Was not
technically
medical.
a dorm.
Okay.
Not medical, no.
Okay.
It's their tech
I
campus.
was confused. So
And-
in New York City,
in New York
on
City.
Roosevelt Island.
And
Okay.
so that air change rate actually equates to about 0.15 air changes per hour for a building of that size when you go down to 0.033.
Okay, so you,
Yeah.
blew it away.
Yeah.
And that project.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Other key requirements? Balanced ventilation.
Yeah.
That was on your list. That was on your list of FAQs.
That is,
And continuous insulation. Those three. I mean, those
Those are the
three. I
three.
think were you got to get those right, or
Absolutely.
you're hopeless.
right. So exactly. So the continuous insulation for durability, the air leakage actually was also for durability.
Yeah.
When they first started the program over 25 years ago, they didn't have that tight of a requirement, and they wound up with homes that had mold and mildew in the walls. They had some massive failures. And so they reevaluated because air could get in, but then they couldn't dry out because the heat flow through the walls was so low. So they determined from testing and analysis that they needed to go down to 0.06 for durability reasons. It wasn't just for energy efficiency.
All right. Okay.
So that's where that developed from.
Gotcha. Interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah. And then the mechanical ventilation, obviously, if you're that tight, you got to provide some fresh air to people.
And it has to be balanced.
And it
yeah.
has to be balanced. Exhaust only systems won't work.
Right.
Yeah.
The air's not going to come back. You'll
Right.
just depressurize that building
Right.
all the time.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool.
And it stresses the fans, right? You start winding, using up more energy than you typically would if you're
Oh, yeah.
depressurizing the building all
Yeah.
the time. Yeah.
And the fans will
Yeah.
die. The fans will burn out. The motors
Right.
will burn out. Yeah.
Right.
So, what can be certified? This is also on your list.
This is a common question. Yes. What can be certified?
Houses, right?
Yeah, passive house,
Passive
right?
house.
Yeah. No, actually, anything can be certified that either has heating or cooling system in it, and that you can do a blower door test on. And so, for example,
Interesting.
something that we couldn't certify, which was really interesting and sad because I wanted to do this project, was one of our developers asked us if we wanted to work on a project in Hawaii.
And you said,
Of course, and that project is mine.
thought about it a
I
little
will
bit.
be the lead consultant on that one,
All right.
and I will open a Hawaiian office if I need to. But they didn't need cooling
Okay.
because of all of the ventilation there, and the ventilation system is a passive ventilation system with just open grills in the walls.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it made me want to move there, but we could not certify the project.
Yeah, and that's a question that's not on the list. But
Yeah.
there are some climates where passive house is kind of moot.
Yeah.
In Hawaii being one.
Yeah.
San Diego
San
probably.
Diego
is one.
probably, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So not only houses though. Any
Anything. We're doing
Insti-
office space.
Okay.
We're doing, somebody has a dentist office certified down in Virginia.
Okay.
So it's high rise, it's low rise, it's offices, it's any type of building. You
Are we
can,
doing a factory?
we're doing a factory in Sri Lanka.
All right.
So anywhere, any type of building.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but we're doing like a portion of a high-rise office building, just a
Correct.
section of the offices within a really big building.
Exactly.
Is that
So
right?
in Boston,
Okay.
there's a project going in Winthrop Square that is 55-story tower. 35 stories of that are residential. About
Okay.
4 stories on the base are retail, restaurant, that sort of stuff. And then there's 20 stories in between those two spaces that is office. And so Passive House Institute has agreed to do it as a pilot project because they haven't really done a middle section of a building like that before. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So not just houses.
No, not just
It started with single-family homes, yes. And
It
then-
started single family low rise. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But evolved a lot from there. Okay. Next question on your FAQs. What is the price premium for doing passive house?
That is usually number one. You can always tell the developer in the room, you're like, So that's a tricky question because it all depends on where your baseline is. If you are a code minimum builder that does nothing more than code buildings, you have a lot farther to go than if you are a typical LEED silver builder. And
Okay.
that's your standard. You're already doing stuff for energy efficiency. You're already doing probably some good ventilation strategies. It may not be passive house level, but you've already got some good stuff in there. and you've already got better insulation levels, then to get to LEED Silver, you'll need some good energy points.
Yep.
So it depends on where you start from. And it also depends on if you come with a building plan already set and say to me, make this passive house. Instead of a program and say, look, I need 100 units. It can't be taller than this. I need some retail space. And the designer is left to, with your budget, to create a project that fits that budget.
Yep.
So we have estimates anywhere from 0 additional cost because of those types of projects
Okay.
to 15% is usually the high end. And that's usually the person that comes to me with a set of plans and says, make this one passive house.
Okay.
And we don't want to change anything.
All right.
So,
Oh, man.
you know, ventilation is going to be an ad because you don't have to do supply, right?
You
It's
just
always
decode
an ad.
minimum exhaust.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Ventilation's an ad. Your windows are probably going to be more expensive.
Yes.
So, you know, you don't always have to go to triple pane windows, but you always have to go to a much better window than is very typical
Okay.
in the United States.
So
you
you primarily work on larger
Very
multifamily
large
buildings,
buildings.
institutional buildings,
offices,
very tall
anything.
buildings.
Very
Okay.
tall buildings, yes.
And Cornell Tech was
26 stories. It was the first tower that tall and that big in the world.
Okay. Passive house.
Passive
yeah, right.
house that to get
Gotcha.
certified.
Okay.
So we really, and that sort of set the ground for all of these other people with large buildings coming and asking us to be certified.
All right.
So,
Gotcha. Cool. And all over the world. My gosh.
Yeah.
Going to Sri Lanka next week? 2 weeks?
Sri Lanka. Dylan's going to do the final blower door testing
All right.
on the Sri Lanka factory. I'm going to Vancouver in 2 weeks because they're adopting it as their code. So they need people who have done large buildings to come
Wow.
out and train some of their developers. So they've hired myself and some other consultants who have experience on big buildings, and we're going out to do some pretty intensive 2-3 day workshops
Cool.
for their developers. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. After price, O&M. Are there big changes in operation and maintenance with passive house buildings?
Generally, no. Generally, you're supposed to see lower maintenance costs because the building's supposed to be more durable. You should see less rot, you should see less leakage, you should see, less things that cause repair. The one area where you probably will have increased maintenance is in the ventilation system because the ERVs have filters that need to be replaced.
Yep.
So the extent of the extra maintenance depends on the type of ventilation strategy you choose. If you choose an individual ERV in every apartment versus centralized systems where you only have 2 or 3, then you've got that many more filters to change if you go with the individual system. So that's where your increased maintenance would be.
Makes sense. And on the heating and cooling side, one would assume that the systems are smaller capacity, maybe lower cost, lower maintenance. That may not always follow.
So that's the hook that Passive House uses to try and tell you that it's a no cost option, right? Like it's a balance. You save money on your heating and cooling, but you pay a little more on your shell. But for large buildings, that's not really the case. Large buildings, these high density buildings, all the large buildings are high density office space. Everything is very high density. They generally have very high internal gains compared to a residential building. So the cooling system doesn't decrease. The heating decreases like
goes
almost
away.
to nothing.
Yeah.
But the cooling stays there. The load
Or
in
even
particular
goes up since you don't have infiltration
Right.
cooling things off at night.
Right. So your demand, your annual demand could possibly stay the same. It probably won't go up because there are specific measures you do take to try and minimize the amount of cooling, especially from exterior. You try and use a lot of bypass for free cooling from your ventilation system. You do employ strategies to try and mitigate the internal gains, but you're not likely going to cut it even by 25% the size of your system. So you basically have the same. If you're using the same system for heating and cooling, you did not decrease the size of your system.
Okay.
Yeah.
So comparable. Ventilation
for
is the
small
big.
projects, yes, you'll save money on your heating and cooling.
Yeah. I've worked on a lot of smaller projects, and they can get away. Even low-rise multifamily can get away with much simpler heating and cooling systems.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Now this one surprised me. This one you said is the most common question that you get about Passive House. Can occupants open their windows?
I know. It throws us
That's
every
on.
time.
That's seriously. We're talking about cost and IQ and ventilation, and this is a. You get this all the time.
All the time. people assume that because the building has to be so airtight that the minute someone opens their window, it ruins the entire project. You shouldn't be able to open your windows. You can't
Oh
have
my
operable
God.
windows. And we get in the biggest fights over this. This is like, like one of those silly things that's so not true, but somehow has, made its way through the
that's
little
funny.
rumor mill about Passive House, and it's absolutely not true. They want you are required in livable spaces, especially residences, to provide operable windows. You have to.
Okay.
They want the occupants to be able to
Good.
open the windows.
Good. All right.
Control their climate. They want the occupants to control their climate.
That rumor it's done. It's
It's
spilled.
quelled.
You
Now
heard it
we're
here? Excellent.
Told
We'll
you I
never
was
hear that
supposed
again. All right, speaking of windows, is there a restriction on the amount of glazing you can have in a passive house?
Technically, no. There's no written, you cannot have greater than 30% window to wall
Okay.
ratio. What happens is the more glass you have, the better the window and the better the shell has to become, right? Because the window is
Yep.
usually the worst portion of your thermal envelope. So when you go to some of these taller buildings, especially the market rate ones where they want to have floor to ceiling glass, they pay the price for
I've
that.
been to Vancouver once, and oh my God, everything is glass. there.
Everything's glass.
That'll be interesting.
That's what they're fighting against right now. Yeah, that's one of the big
Yeah.
issues. Yeah. Yeah. So you probably couldn't in this climate
Yeah,
have
it's
an
climate.
all glass building. You
okay.
probably could in San Diego.
All right. Again, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very climate dependent.
Yeah.
It's all about the energy budget.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. What are the major roadblocks to passive house compliance?
So again, it's pretty climate specific because we have such an extreme climate here that, especially for ventilation,
Here in New England. Yeah.
in the cold climates in general, I would say.
4 or 5 up, ICC,
yeah.
5 and up, something
Yes.
like that.
You need energy recovery or heat recovery ventilation. We're very limited on efficient systems, whether they're individual or central systems. We only have 1 or 2 options for each, and
That are certified or that work out in the modeling?
that work
Or-
out in the modeling.
Okay.
And that have the type of controls and efficiency levels that you'd want. Because you can't, especially for individual ones, if the less efficient the ERV, the colder the air coming in, the more comfort problems you're going to have with your occupants. So it's really a huge concern. UL listing on these equipment, we need to make sure that they're UL listed. We have very few that are. There's a ton of great ERVs out there in the world. We just don't have them in the United States.
Okay.
So- and
or
we also-
Canada, or is it
Canada has more options
better?
than
Okay.
we do.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
And then the other part that we're still seeing roadblocks on are small enough heating and cooling systems.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I do hear that one heat pump manufacturer just came out with a 4,000 BTU head.
I have seen them in
And they-
real
we-
with my own eyes. I
We
have
just
seen
got the
them.
notification today that was released from the manufacturer. We got a.
Oh, so the one
a
I saw
splash.
was at a show. It wasn't actually launched.
It
was
wasn't
just-
launched yet. We've got
that
the
was just-
official launch now. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I
that's
was
great.
misled. I'll be making some calls.
They probably had all of their certifications by then.
Okay.
But I don't think they had announced it to the public.
All right.
Officially. So we just got the mass email.
Very good.
So that's great news, but we need more. That's one manufacturer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, that's any building type. I mean, you're making the load smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And the way to heat and cool hasn't changed enough, hasn't caught up.
No.
This is similar. What changes to standard practices will be needed to meet passive house criteria? The ceiling is the first thing that comes to my mind.
The air ceiling?
Yeah.
Yeah. We constantly sit in meetings and people are like, that's not how we typically do things. So there's a lot more attention to really good, durable, flexible tapes instead
Okay.
of just relying on caulk.
Okay.
That sort of thing. It's everybody on the job has to know what you're trying to achieve. That's one of the things. You can't just have your electrician come in and rip holes through your insulation and run wire and holes through the building assembly and then leave and not have at least somebody
Not
else on
making fun
site
of
who's
electricians. We don't want any plumbers do it too.
plumbers, HVAC contractors, carpenters. Everybody does it.
Everybody
Every
does it.
trade does it. Every trade needs to be on board. The other thing you need to do is, and I always thought this was funny because since I've gotten into Passive House over the last 8 years, I've heard so many people talk about the integrated design process. And then I go to presentations and they're like, well, you need to have these people on board early. And I'm like, well, isn't that how everybody always works? Because that's how every Passive House project works.
Man.
I mean, you're not going to get there if you don't. You got to have a contractor ready so that they can help you with pricing and help bring down the costs. You got to have your HVAC contractor on board because they need to know that the loads are going to be low. The building's going to be tested, it's going to be inspected, and they have to believe you that the loads are going to be low so that they size the equipment properly.
Right.
So really you need your whole team, all your consultants on board at the beginning. So that's another pretty big change to standard practice.
Yep. That makes sense. Absolutely. Similar, very similar. What are the implications to the schedule, construction schedule?
We get that question a lot.
These
they
are
have to be
your list of FAQs.
Yeah, they are mine.
That's why.
Coming from the Northeast, and in particular working in New York, the answer to that has to be there's absolutely no implications because they would never allow Passive House in the borders of New York. If you told a construction team that you were going to delay their schedule by 10 weeks,
geez.
20, whatever. I've had some of the consultants from Canada tell me that they tell the design team that they need to put the building or the process on hold between DD and CDs for 2 months or so that they can go through the pre-certification process. And I go, no, we do not do that. We never say that. We are on board with the certifiers from the beginning. We're constantly doing the analysis from the beginning. And they looked at me like, well, what happens if there's a big change? I go, then we deal with it. But you can't slow a construction team down by even 2 weeks.
No.
They would kill you.
Half a day.
My God. A day. You come in and you tell them there's something wrong that they need to fix. And it's like, we're going to do it now. Stay here. You're going to sign off on it before you leave.
Right. You're not sleeping
you're not
until
sleeping.
you said we can.
You're not
we can
leaving
continue.
this site.
Yep.
So, no, there's very few times when there's the occasion where a contractor changed what they were supposed to do in the field without asking. And then they have to fix it.
Yeah.
And so that has implications. But that's not because it's Passive House. That's because they didn't do what was on the plans and the drawings.
Gotcha.
And they didn't come up with an acceptable solution and they did something wrong. So we have a couple projects out there right now where one of the contractors did what they normally do instead of what was in the drawings. They just flew by the seat of their pants, and now we have to go back and rip out some drywall.
All right.
So
Fun.
Yeah.
A lot of drywall or just a little bit of drywall? Fair amount of drywall.
Potentially a lot of drywall.
Okay. This is probably my favorite. Are there conflicts between Passive House and code requirements or other program requirements?
Yes, there are. And it all
What are they?
starts it all starts with ASHRAE 62.2. Now, mind you, I am on a subcommittee for that standard, but I am a conscientious objector to many of the things that they require. No, it has to do, a lot of it has to do with the kitchen ventilation and the studies that some of the labs have been doing and the high levels of ventilation that they're requiring. But my argument is always, and it's exhaust-only systems that are the issue. They're requiring certain high levels of kitchen exhaust, and I keep trying to tell them, you're not going to get any exhaust because these buildings are too tight. And even if you've only built the building to lead, an apartment in the middle of an apartment building only has one exterior wall.
Right.
Only a few CFM is going to come through that. The 100 CFM that they're requiring for intermittent or the 5 air changes per hour for continuous is not going to come through the exterior envelope. It's not going to be fresh air coming from the outside. It's going to be from the neighboring apartments. And that's anti what they want.
Right.
But that's what's going to happen. And we can't convince a Passive House would like lower levels of ventilation, but balanced and supplied to all the living spaces and then exhaust from the kitchens and the bath. But it's much lower than the codes and the ASHRAE standard in particular require. So there's a conflict there. They don't see our low levels of balanced ventilation as better than their high levels of exhaust only, even though I think we've shown on multiple projects that that high level doesn't work when you don't have makeup air.
And it's different. It's different for single family detached and a big multifamily.
Absolutely.
not that exhaust only is always okay in single family, but the exhaust is not coming from your neighbor. It's not
Right.
coming from the garbage chute. It's coming from outside.
Right.
Now, is it coming from a crawl space filled with radon? That's bad. That's a concern.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, exhaust only in big multifamily buildings, nobody knows where that air is coming from.
Right. What we think is that filtration is going to become a bigger part of the solution, but we don't have that
Okay.
many great products out there yet that the labs feel comfortable would do a great job. And then again, it's all based on maintenance, right? All of these solutions are based
Yeah.
on maintenance. Are you going to clean your filters? Because when you stop cleaning your filters, they don't work either.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's one of the hardest ones to deal with.
Yeah.
And most of the conflicts we have are with ventilation. It's not really with anything else. You can talk about thermal breaks, and the conflicts might be with your structural engineer, but there's always ways to deal with it.
Right.
The ventilation thing is one of those ones where there's this constant battle.
There's line in the sand.
Yeah.
And nobody's
Yeah.
really.
Nobody's
budging.
pleased.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's tricky. I don't have an answer. I mean, I understand passive house. I mean, they seem low to me, the passive house requirements, but at the same, exhaust only in multifamily just doesn't work.
Right.
We know that.
How
What
do
do you
you
do?
ventilate a 400 square foot studio apartment at 5 air changes per hour and meet any kind of energy
Yeah.
budget? You know,
Right.
I mean, that's just ludicrous. So
Well, here's a practical question. Can the capacity of a ventilation system be higher, but not always run? So do the modeling for a lower capacity ventilation, and if somebody wants more, they can boost it.
very
Is that-
easy to do with individual
Okay.
ERVs.
Yep.
Much harder to do with central
Central.
systems
Yeah.
in large projects. But it can be done.
Okay.
I have spoken with people in the Northwest that have been working on passive house projects, and they put things like inline booster fans in their bathrooms.
All right, interesting. Okay.
And they have a variable speed drive on the central system that is supposedly responding to me boosting my bathroom.
Maintaining a static pressure.
Exactly.
Yeah, that
Exactly.
makes sense.
It takes a lot of controls and a lot more product, a
Yep.
lot more pieces of equipment, and people are leery of that. They would prefer to put in constant volume. Let's balance that and get that to work. But I think
I
that
can see that.
that might be the next breakthrough.
Okay.
If we can find
Do
something
that
works well.
effectively and
do that effectively.
Cost
'Cause
effectively, practically, yeah.
I think it's been shown that the boost when you're cooking especially is important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, we'll solve that next week.
Next time.
Yeah. All right, so those are all of your FAQs,
Okay.
which are good. Thanks. But I have two more questions.
Uh-oh.
And they're not hard questions.
These are the questions
But
that make the contestant cry.
We'll see. There's some tissues on the desk over there. Who is building passive houses and why? I mean, the people that are doing it, who's doing it and why?
So we have a lot of affordable housing developers going to passive house. And
Interesting. Is that just kind of our clients or really kind of nationwide you're seeing that? trend?
nationwide.
Okay.
We're seeing affordable housing agencies put it on tax credit applications. We're seeing developers just come to us. And it's not necessarily because they're getting incentives to do it. They see it as they're owning the buildings too, right? So you have to
Okay,
understand that. So
okay.
they're paying part of the cost. So they see it as energy reduction. They're also paying part of the heating for their tenants. So that is also another energy reduction for them. But they are really committed to the people that live in their buildings.
Yeah.
And providing a low income tenant with a low energy bill is really important to them, and comfort and durability and good indoor air quality. They're just
Yep.
a wonderful group of developers to work with. So
Yeah,
they're
over
really
the, I mean,
committed.
in the 20 years that I've been doing it, it's kind of mission-driven groups that are really
Yeah.
not just looking at the bottom line, but really want to provide quality housing, quality
exactly.
buildings. It's
Exactly.
very gratifying to work with folks like that.
And then we have mission driven market rate people that companies they believe in it. They've bought into the 50 by 80
Okay.
80 by 50 challenges, right? Like they want to reduce carbon. They live in cities that's their goal, and they want to be part of that solution, and they're willing to be leaders in that. So we have a number of market rate clients that are pushing that as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, trying
Awesome.
to differentiate themselves from.
Gotcha. So not incentive-driven, just
No.
really, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That is cool.
And geography, I mean, we're mostly in the Northeast, probably, but I mean, nationwide, do you have a feel for, are there hotspots? California, I mean, big cities?
The Northwest.
Okay.
Yep, they're a little more active there. Canada's going crazy right now.
Okay.
Because of the codes. New York really is the driver. Partly
Okay.
the city, the state, everybody's behind this carbon reduction goal.
Yeah.
Passive House is seen as one of the ways through, not the only way, but one of the ways through. Plus the whole push to net zero from everyone, everywhere, is Passive House is seen as sort of like the first stepping stone, like getting your building energy use down by those metrics first.
Sure.
And then adding renewables and whatever other technology. And so it's not necessarily the certification that is so important, it's just the measures.
The principle.
Yeah, the principles. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Last question. If we talk again in 5 years, what are we going to be talking about?
How stupid we were, probably, that we didn't know this wasn't actually going to work this particular way. Like, for instance, we thought, okay, it's supposed to reduce energy use by this much. And maybe the tenants are so comfortable, they're turning up their heat and want to be, it's that whole thing, like, or maybe.
Or the modeling might not be quite as accurate as one might hope.
Oh, how often does that happen? Come on, that never happens.
Every project.
Come on. Modelers are fantastic. Well, models are fantastic. Modelers are fantastic. I love modelers. But what we're really hoping for right now is that all of our projects are going to employ some sort of monitoring.
Yeah.
Because we are expecting some of these buildings to not perform the way that we hope they will. But if we can't tell people why, then we've failed.
Yeah, right.
We just need to be able to say, okay, here's the problem. We need to look at this differently and move forward.
A lot of the technology, the heat pumps, the new ventilation systems, they're just a lot of new stuff.
A lot of new stuff.
Being installed in the building for 5 years, being maintained to different levels of rigor. Yeah.
Yep.
We'll see.
I know.
Like anything else, I guess.
One of the biggest issues is, especially on, is the maintenance staff education levels with this new technology as well.
Yeah.
What they're used to maintaining. We're working with the School Construction Authority in New York to evaluate what it means to go to this level of efficiency, not necessarily certifying to Passive House, but these levels of efficiency. And they constantly talk about education of their current maintenance staff and what their maintenance staff will use. Even the schedules that are in the building management systems for turning things on and off, they'll override them quite a few times because they don't want to be dealing with turning them on and off for special groups. So they'll just put them on 24/7. So you go look at the utility bills and you're like, this is not what we designed.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of education is needed.
Yeah, for anything. And this, I get, hopefully these will be under a little bit of a microscope to inspect them. So we'll figure all that stuff out.
Uh-huh. Yes, we will.
Cool. Anything else? Any other big picture Passive House pieces? We covered a lot.
We covered it all, Rob.
All right. Don, you're all experts.
We're all experts.
Sweet. Thanks, Lois.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you for listening to Buildings and Beyond. For more information about the topics discussed today, visit www.swinter.com/podcast and check out the episode's show notes. Buildings and Beyond is brought to you by Stephen Winter Associates. We provide energy, green building, and accessibility consulting services to improve the built environment. Our professionals have led the way since 1972 in the development of best practices to achieve high-performance buildings. Our production team for today's episode includes Dylan Martello, Alex Mirable, and myself, Heather Breslin. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.